At Baxus, our real focus is the tokenization and markets of wine and spirits. We love to brag about this, but on Baxus, we have users who are in their 70s and 80s. And I don't think there are really any other crypto protocols or blockchain protocols that could say that they have 70-year-olds and 80-year-olds using their platform. And that Baxus is really setting out for is giving people real-world experiences and real-life benefits and use cases so that they can do things they never were able to do before blockchain really took off. And that's how we think the next million users are going to be onboarded to crypto and beyond.
Hi, everyone, and welcome to another really exciting episode of Voices of Web3 by Voice of Crypto, where, as you all are familiar, we get the top guests. We get pioneers from the space of Web3, crypto, and emerging technologies like blockchain and AI. And today we have with us a really interesting guest. We have Tzvi Wiesel with us, who is the CEO, co-founder of Baxus. And I've already spoken to him about the project, and he's doing some really interesting stuff out there, which is exactly why we call our episode today The Art of Tokenization, and how these guys have managed to become the great artists at the art of tokenization is something that he's going to walk us through in detail. Thank you so much for joining us today, Tzvi. And the stage is all yours. Please go ahead and introduce yourself, talk a little bit about Baxus.
Thank you so much, Aruni, for having me. As you mentioned, my name is Tzvi Wiesel, and I'm the CEO and co-founder of Baxus. At Baxus, our real focus is the tokenization and markets of wine and spirits, of fine and rare wines and spirits. And so we work with collectors, traders, investors, enthusiasts to really help them find all over the world the hardest to find, rarest bottles and casks, barrels as well, of, like I said, fine and rare wines and spirits. We actually physically vault them, providing authentication and security, and then tokenize them, putting them on chain so that the ownership of those assets can be traded anywhere in the world.
Absolutely. So if I'm not wrong, there has been a rise in investing in spirits and collecting as well. How did you sort of monetize on this idea? Where did you come up with this idea? What sort of market research went into sort of bringing the project live?
Yeah, so this weekend actually was a perfect example for why we launched Baxus. A single bottle of whiskey, a Macallan 1926 Valerio Adami, just sold at auction for $2.7 million. But when you look at the actual hammer price, meaning the actual, the price at the end of the auction, it was around 2.1 million pounds, which, when you think about that to the dollar side, you end up having about 25 or 30% fees on top of it, the hammer fees that the buyer then pays. So that's what really drives up the price from, let's say, $2.3 million all the way up to $2.7 million. So the buyer ends up paying an extra $300,000, and that bottle hasn't been seen at auction in a couple of years. So let's say you're someone who has a 1926 Valerio Adami sitting, at home, which, if you do, please contact me, because that means you're sitting on a, close to $3 million bottle of whiskey. But there's no way to access the actual value of that asset other than bringing it to auction. And what I saw when I looked at tokenization and I looked at crypto and I looked at the markets and the way that NFTs traded was, what was so incredible was it allowed artists to sell their art to people anywhere in the world. And so when we were sitting there thinking, I have a background, I used to be a whiskey trader, and I was a big enthusiast and collector. So I looked at this market where I'm like, why is it that every time I want to trade a bottle, I have to ship it to someone? I have to send it halfway around the world, which, these are stored in glass bottles. So there's risk, I don't know what shipping is like by you, but I would say that the package handlers by us don't necessarily treat everything with the utmost care. And so we said, how do we take the best parts of blockchain and tokenization and NFTs, but apply it to a type of collectible or asset that has an intrinsic value that people are looking for, that are hard to find? And that's really where Baxus came from, was helping to connect collectors with the items they want to collect.
So you were pretty quick on identifying this trend in the market, and you already mentioned that you have been a trader of spirits for quite some time. If I'm not wrong, this is a rather chaotic market, still hasn't seen the daylight of the mainstream media as much. Baxus surely has. I'm sure I've read all of those Forbes articles. So, what were the key challenges that you guys faced, and how were you able to identify them and work on those as a sector?
It's a great question. So for us, some of our earliest issues, I would say, are, we're based in the US. So there's the first issue is just the regulatory framework in the US around tokenization and crypto and blockchain is very hard to navigate. We were very fortunate that our focus, because we were focusing on real world goods, we weren't printing tokens out of the air. A lot of the concerns around securities and things like that were able to overcome. We have very good legal counsel, and Baxus was able to position itself in a way where we weren't addressing the same issues that crypto or NFT projects were facing. Because each of our tokens it's not fractionalized, it's one-to-one ownership of the underlying asset. The other, I'd say some of the earlier things also was that the average wine and whiskey collector trends to be older. Older, like an older generation. And so we had to figure out, how do we abstract away all of the complicated, riskier parts of blockchain to give them a really, really simple and easy to use interface, because they might be sitting there trying to buy, we love to brag about this, but on Baxus, we have users who are in their 70s and 80s. And I don't think there are really any other crypto protocols or blockchain protocols that could say that they have 70-year-olds and 80-year-olds using their platform. And for us, that's something we're really proud of, because we look at how this market grows, and the way that you really grow a market is obviously starting with younger people, and that's a separate thing of we have an age gap. They're not trading if they're below legal, if they're below 18 or 21, depending on what country they're in. But at the same time, that means that we want to be able to capture the runway going up. We want to be able to catch people going into their 60s, 70s, 80s. So really thinking about how we abstract away blockchain, how we make it super simple for people to use, was also an early challenge, because so much of the initial blockchain focus was on purely digital, purely tokenized, token native transactions. Now, thankfully, we have more stable coins and cryptocurrencies that help people, transact, and more protocols that allow for everyday people to use a credit card to pay for something, or to generate a wallet using an email instead of a seed phrase. So those were some of the earliest challenges, were overcoming the early parts of blockchain in order to make sure that Baxus was really user-friendly.
Makes sense. How exactly are you guys incorporating blockchain technology, AI, I'm sure, and data analysis to sort of get more customers? And how are you sort of making the right kind of UX UI? Because you mentioned that the target age group, or the current customer base, is in the higher age group. So how do you make it rather simple for, I'm sure, guys who are not as well versed with tech as, let's say, an 18-year-old would be? How are you guys managing that while incorporating blockchain tech in all of this?
Yeah, so the blockchain technology for us was really, the brilliance of blockchain was what it does on the back end. It's the ability to have this, immutable permanent ledger that can prove provenance, because that's so important in wines and spirits, is who owned this before? Where did this come from? Is this authentic? And so that's a big part of what we do, is when the bottles come into our vault, we actually take the bottles, we scan them, we do a 360-degree scan of the bottles. We authenticate them, making sure with human experts, and that's where the AI comes in as well, is we're using those human experts and those scans to train AI computer vision models, so that in the future, our goal is that you could pull out your phone, using this huge data set of historical bottles, and take a picture of a bottle, or just tap it, look at your phone at it, and it'll say, based on the color of the liquid, or the height of the label, or the seal on the foil cap, this is authentic or inauthentic. So really building the world's largest, photographic database with that, human supervised learning, basically, on the machine learning models from human experts. So that's how we're, incorporating AI, and where we hope that continues to go, is to be able to, as we feed it more data, to be able to extrapolate more and more information about the bottles. On top of it, as the blockchain side, so that's about the record keeping and the transactions. So each of these bottles themselves, the ownership, the proof of ownership is tokenized. And so that's really important to us, because it means that those tokens are able to, how would I put it? I'm just trying to think each of those tokens representing one-of-one ownership on Baxus means that you now, when you complete a transaction, we have a record of who you sold it to, how much you sold it for. So that helps to create price discovery. Because one of the other really hard points with almost any sort of these trading cards or collectibles is, and especially with auctions, is, well, what's the value? What is this worth right now? Because there are some bottles that might not have appeared at auction for 10 years, 15 years, 20 years, but we know that it's not the same price as it was 10, 15, or 20 years ago. So trying to understand what the values of those trades are, and getting, because a lot of those trades might happen privately. Somebody might sell it to their friends. So getting all of that data in there is really important as well. So data scraping from the internet, collecting information from auctions, from private transactions, that really helps feed that democratization element, that ability to really present information to users in a way that's really simple to understand. So in the same way that if you go onto a crypto exchange or an NFT exchange, you see exactly what the last price that the asset sold for was. So you're not trying to guess. And so that's something that we're trying to bring as well. And then on top of it is each bottle itself gets tagged with an RFID. And each of those RFID stickers then holds onto that metadata of the authentication, of the scan, all of the information that goes into the bottle at the time that we run it, becomes really, really important for us as well. And that's something that we are storing on the blockchain, so that eventually when these bottles, some of the bottles in our vault are over 100 years old. And so what's really cool is we hope that in 100 years from now, when somebody opens up a bottle that may have been released today, they can tap the RFID and see the history, the full history of that bottle, in a way that we can't right now for these bottles that are currently over 100 years old. So Baxus is really focused on not just the technology of the future, but preserving the past using that technology.
Really interesting stuff, and quite a few new concepts out there as well. If I'm not wrong, Baxus is also connecting a lot of global distilleries, right? So if you can, in terms of geographies, talk about what all distilleries have you partnered with, and how exactly are investors benefiting from this, or how are your customers benefiting from this sort of a partnership?
Yeah, so one of the other pieces of blockchain that we built out using LoRaWAN on the Helium network is this ability to actually track climate data. So temperature, humidity, the information that's really important to making sure the bottles are stored properly, is also really useful and interesting data in the maturation process of the barrels and the casks that are aging at the distilleries. So when we work with distilleries, we provide them with a couple of different benefits. One of them is the creation of cask clubs. So they can actually form like a private membership group where you get a membership to the distillery, you get your own barrel of whiskey, and you develop this affinity and this brand, loyalty between you and the distillery, in order to be able to like prove, in the same way that you can now, like with token gated chats, you can like log on to their website and connect your wallet, or in this case, your email and your account, because your wallet is linked to it. And then you'll get access to special pages or special releases or things that the average public doesn't get, because you've bought into it. You're a part of the fan club. And that's one like really cool way. And that's something that, again, builds that relationship between the distillery and the consumer. Because right now, distilleries might produce stuff in Scotland and then sell the bottles to New York or to India or to Australia, and they don't know who their customer on the other side is. So by using Baxus and by having this stuff stored, they're able to see anonymously. They don't see your name, but they see, hey, this account has these bottles from our brand, and we would love to invite them to the distillery for a private tour when they come to visit us in Scotland, or we would love to send them an offer for a special limited edition bottle, or even if it's a limited edition glass, something that's really cool to show that the brand wants to develop its relationship with you. Because that's ultimately, when it comes to things like spirits, there are so many choices out there, so many different whiskeys around the world. So it's about building those relationships with your customers and your consumers that really makes long-term permanent relationships, and it helps them continue to grow, even at times when people might stop buying. If there's a slowdown in the economy or people are buying less whiskey, people still have their brands that they're loyal to, and we're helping them build that brand loyalty.
I was reading about a lending feature on Baxus, which came off as a really interesting feature to me, because you can definitely transfer ownership. But how would lending of something like spirits, which you've tokenized, work, and how does it exactly benefit customers?
Yeah, so lending is one of my favorite features that we're rolling out, because it effectively doesn't exist in the world right now for private collections of spirits. So typically when you think of collateral, you think of a car, a house, things that can be, repossessed in the event of a default. But what makes spirits lending so interesting, especially where you have this real-time pricing data, is that you're now able to determine that this bottle is worth X amount of dollars, and it's been worth that amount of, of money, because whiskey and spirits in general and wine tend to be less volatile than the rest of the markets, especially on the day-to-day. You may see some, obviously you see increases and, decreases over time, but it's not like, a bottle is going from, $300 to $5 in a day, and you see this with certain, stocks or crypto tokens. There's news that can drop the price or skyrocket the price from a collateral perspective. So what enables the lenders and the borrowers to do on Baxus is to know that these bottles are authentic and they're safely secured, and that the lender now can lend against the bottle, the specific bottle or the specific cask. And it has two major impacts. One of them is it allows for people who are sitting on really valuable assets to access liquidity in a way that they never could before. Because right now, the only way for them to access that liquidity would be to sell the bottle. But they don't necessarily want to sell it. They might say, hey, you know what? I think this has a ton of value and I want to hold this for 20 years, but I would like to borrow $1,000 right now to go and fix my car, or buy a new pair of shoes, whatever it is that these people want the money for, and they can now borrow against those valuable assets without having to sell them. So that's the first side where it helps the, the retail collector or consumer. Where it also helps on two sides is for the institutions, because we want to bring on more institutional investors who are buying bottles, who are buying casks of whiskey and spirits and wine. And for them, institutions, when they're buying almost anything, are using margin. They're using the ability to buy these assets, but then to borrow against them so that they continue to trade. So by giving them that same access to capital against those assets, and by providing clear pricing data, by providing clear pricing data to lenders, they understand the loan to value ratios and the risk that they're taking. And then lastly, it really helps new brands and distilleries, because brands and distilleries are, especially in the wines and spirits game, it's a waiting game. To make a 30-year whiskey, you need 30 years. So you have to produce the whiskey today. You have all of the capital costs up front, but you're not necessarily able to extract any value until 30 years comes around. And that obviously has a huge impact on business operations. And so what we've done at Baxus is now enable new brands and new distilleries that are getting off the ground to collateralize their inventory and be able to grow their business without having to take some of the more traditional routes, which often benefit the financiers, but are much less beneficial to the actual distilleries and brands.
All right. On a very layman's level, how is Baxus different from, let's say, a traditional trading platform? I already know that there are not a lot of hidden fees, or there's nothing that would, keep your customers in dark. But what I think would be the key points that differentiate you guys from a traditional platform, and why would you, and what exactly is your, let's say, elevator pitch to customers or institutional investors?
Yeah, so the first thing is security. All the bottles in the Baxus vault are authenticated and insured. And that's like the first critical off the ground, is these are properly stored, they're insured, and they're authentic. So if you're buying something on Baxus, you know that the bottle you see is the bottle you get, because we also do that full 360-degree scan. So it's not a 3D image or a stock photo. It's, if there's a tear in the label, you see that, which is really important when it comes to things like whiskey and collectibles in general, is the condition of the bottle, the condition of the asset. And that's something that you don't get in a lot of other platforms, because they're giving you 3D digital renderings or just stock images. So that's the first differentiator. The second part is we charge a seller's fee on each sale, a 10% seller's fee, but we don't charge a buyer's premium. So the price you see is the price you pay, which is also really, really important, because on so many other platforms, or even on auctions, as I mentioned, there's somewhere between a 10 and 30% buyer's premium. And so by eliminating the buyer's premium, the seller and the buyer are both getting better deals, because the seller is able to list it at a higher price. The buyer is able to buy it at the price that they see without paying premiums. And so even though the seller pays the 10% fee, they end up netting out more money than they would if they were selling it on another type of, on an auction or a more traditional platform. And lastly, what it really, really helps with is, again, and this is kind of the core of Baxus, is it helps connect to a global market, because you can have the bottle stored in the US and the owner can live in the UK, and the new buyer can live in Australia or India or anywhere around the world, and be able to trade globally without the friction of having to ship these things all over the world.
Absolutely. You briefly spoke about your consumer base, and if I'm not wrong, there's quite a big waiting list that you guys have for your customers, it clearly shows that there is a very decent demand in the market for such kind of investment products. Do you see this becoming a norm for large company portfolios? And also, what kind of customers are you seeing in terms of geographies? Age, you already briefly spoke about, but if you could talk a little bit more about that. Are there more men, women, other genders? How does it look like?
Yeah, so what we believe and what we're seeing now is that there was a report that came out last year. I have to double check which, I don't want to misspeak as to which report, but it showed that 40% of ultra high net worth individuals in family offices intend to diversify their portfolios into wines and spirits. They intend to bring wines and spirits into their actual portfolio of what they're holding as assets. And that's fantastic, because again, these are really, really interesting types of assets in general. They appreciate with age and time. They're naturally deflationary in that every time somebody opens a bottle to enjoy it, there's one less bottle in circulation for somebody else to buy. And so eventually the specific vintage or the specific bottles will run out. And so providing that data to traders and collectors means, more and more information about how much is out there. So for us, it's about, offering them an opportunity to start trading, which becomes really beneficial to retail consumers and retail traders, because they might be the ones who have the first access in their liquor stores and their local shops. But then they're not just trading it with their friends locally. They're able to now sell it to a global audience who might want a limited edition bottle that was only released in California and is now available to people all over the world. So on the demographic side, definitely trends right now. There's definitely more men on the platform. And that's something that we're looking to, increase and grow that pool over time. And a lot of that comes from different perspectives. I think historically, whiskey and spirits have traditionally been viewed very much so in like a more male space, but that is changing. There's a lot of really great initiatives to help grow that market as well and really change that. And that's something that we're doing as well through education and through, providing information that, hey, this isn't just, an old boys club. There's really an opportunity for everyone over here. And what's super interesting about it is that most of the actual distillers, the producers of whiskey there's a lot of women in that side of the industry actually doing the master distillers or the master blenders. And so it becomes really interesting to see that disconnect. And we're like, okay, how do we share that information with the world to let them know, like, hey, the whiskey that you're drinking was actually, was made by a woman who's been in this industry for 30 years. That bottle I mentioned, the 1926 bottle that just sold for, $2.7 million, that was laid down at the Macallan distillery by a woman, what is that, like 80, 90, almost 100 years ago, 97 years ago. And so that's really, really cool to think about that, like that type of foresight, and that, like, again, this was somebody in the 1920s who did this, like a woman, like, when you wouldn't expect that to be the case. As far as on the global side, so we have users right now from all over the world. It definitely leans heavier between, I'd say, the US and the UK right now. As far as user base, those tend to be the larger areas for trading, but we are growing and expanding. We have a strong contingent of users now in China and in Southeast Asia that are increasing, some in Australia. And we're really, as we grow, what we're looking to do is open more vaults all over the world, more local vaults, because I think that will also help users get more comfortable with the idea that, hey, if I have bottles sitting at my house right now, I don't want to necessarily ship them to America. That's what we're looking to eliminate. There's still that risk. What I want to do is deposit it, at a vault that's closest to my home. So we want to grow and expand our vaulting model as well to really give people more local storage and comfort and security.
Absolutely. And finally, from when you guys founded the firm to now, how have things changed, and what is your long-term view for the company at this point?
Yeah, so when we first founded Baxus in 2021, NFTs and purely digital art were all the rage. The idea that we were even talking about tokenizing real world assets was not on anyone's radar. They were like, I don't understand. Like, do you destroy the whiskey and then just sell pictures of it? And I'm like, no. Like, the value is in the bottle. You don't want to destroy it. And really, we got approached by potential investors we were talking with who thought that was the idea. There was, at the time, somebody who's like, if you have a diamond and you tokenize it and you destroy the diamond, the token has the same value. And I'm like, good luck proposing to someone with a tokenized diamond ring. Like, no one's going to want that. So that was like the biggest early kind of hurdle, was overcoming that perception that the future of tokenization is a purely digital element. What's really grown for Baxus since then is this RWA meta, so to speak, has really emerged, where people are starting to understand the value of, wait a second, actually taking things that people want already or that they've been trading already and making it easier to trade on a global scale is actually the solution we need. It's actually tokenizing whiskey and tokenizing gold and tokenizing all of these different types of, trading cards and concert tickets, all of these different type of assets, and making those available is really the secret over here to the growth of the crypto and consumer markets. And that's in our opinion at Baxus, that's what we're noticing is everyone talks about onboarding the next million users to crypto, right? It's all about this is going to onboard 1 million users. And in reality, the platforms that have onboarded millions and millions of users have given people real world benefit, real world use cases. Decentralized social media is interesting, and I'm curious to see where it goes, but people are okay with Facebook right now. They're okay with Twitter and Instagram or X and WhatsApp and all these different channels. So you have to give them something novel that really doesn't exist. And what we're doing in the tokenized space, and by making it possible for people all over the world to start trading, that's really unique. That's really unique. And that's something that Baxus is really setting out for, is giving people real world experiences and real life benefits and use cases so that they can do things they never were able to do before blockchain really took off. And that's how we think the next million users are going to be onboarded to crypto and beyond, is giving people real world value for real world assets and being able to have the same access to liquidity they could as if it was a car or a house.
Absolutely. Also, any exciting things that we should be expecting or the market should be expecting from Baxus as the year closes? What are your expectations from the next year in particular? Are you going to have any big New Year openings or offers for your consumers?
Yeah, so Baxus is we're planning a lot of really big partnerships. I'm not going to announce any of them yet, but really big partnerships with well-known distilleries and wineries. And so we're going to be helping them, again, connect with their consumers, launch new products directly to the market, create new experiences. That's another really big part, is that experiential element, where if you buy a bottle from a chateau in France, you can actually travel to the chateau and get a private tour that no one else gets except for the owners of those specific unique bottles and assets. And that's really unique for users as well, because it means that when they're traveling, they're building this, this bigger relationship over there. So that's something that you can definitely expect. We actually just announced the other day that Baxus acquired Booze App, which is a platform that allows for people to go into their local, liquor stores and actually check prices to see if the local store's pricing is, fair pricing or how users rate the pricing. So we're going to be adding a lot of features to Booze App and Baxus. So user reviews, fair market pricing, but more importantly, we're going to be scaling Booze App on a global scale. Right now, it's really limited to the US. We're going to be working around the globe to collect local data so that people have an idea of what the bottles are worth, and no matter where they are in the world. So that's something else you can expect. And then ultimately really, really growing the number of, assets and locations where our vaults are on the platform. So our goal is, it's ambitious, but for 2024, we're aiming to have over $100 million worth of wines and spirits stored in our vaults and tokenized on the platform.
That sounds pretty amazing. A lot of intense stuff coming up from you guys and your team. I wish you all the very best for it. And this was a really interesting and exciting chat once again. And I hope our users and audiences enjoyed it as much as I did. Thank you so much for joining us again, Tzvi, and on such short notice. And looking forward to
thank you so much.
Thank you.
Thank you for having me. Take care.
The pleasure was mine. Thank you, everyone.